But just FYI, I do fix all strings. So I did restore 2 sitars and what do you call that? An oud, an Egyptian oud, and then later on a Turkish oud. But yeah, I do get those kind of musicians that kind of beat on their instruments and play them in other genres and so forth. But I have not had a hard time with those players. And it's more because we're looking for something so less than refined from those instruments. Well, they are, at least. When I ask about the sound and so forth, a lot of those kind of players are like, man, I don't know what past the D style. I don't know half of the neck. They just got really good at just the bottom and stuff, and they just need a distinctive thump or just boom. They just need volume, and they're like, well, how can you make it louder? Those are simple things for me to answer. It's more the jazz, the classical, sometimes R&B, those kind of musicians that are now paying attention to the individual notes and the evenness and things like that. And they're talking about nuance and asking me an advice on strings and all that kind of stuff. So, yeah.
And what are some of the, you mentioned a couple of them, but what are some of the other unusual string instruments that you've had and everything? Definitely people know about the Indian sitar and things of that nature, but I'm always just fascinated learning about different styles of music and different styles of instrumentation. So I was just wondering, what are some of the things that you found out that were interesting to you? Like I have some relatives that play in Native American bands, and I know that they have some string instruments that may not necessarily be the standard string instruments, but I was just wondering if you could share some that you had dealings with.
Well, I haven't had any dealing with those yet. So I am Native on my mother's side, and through that I ended up coming across the Native American flute, which I've been, practicing in my spare time and things. But in terms of their string instruments and their percussion, I have not actually messed with yet. I'd say the weirdest that I've come across so far have been the sitar, the oud, and what do you call a bass mandolin? The craziest looking thing I've ever seen. Mandolin is kind of a tear-shaped, sort of almost a miniature guitar, a teardrop shape, I meant, with kind of a deep hole. Well, I saw one bass-sized with a kickstand, and so forth, and that I had to restore. And I would say maybe that's up there with the weirdest. Yeah.
Wow. I would definitely do it. You're sitting there trying to figure out how to make that instrument work and everything, but I'm sure that you're able to do that. I was expecting one more caller. It looks like I might have got that one, but definitely if you can, stay on the line, and we're going to see who else we've got. But first, I need Dean to run me an ad.
Thanks.
Before we get you off, though, Dr. Bass, how can folks reach you? Because we have listeners throughout. Who knows? You may even have somebody in Dean's area of Jersey that's ready to get their instrument fixed.
Okay, well, they need to know a couple things. One, I'm from New York, and I still have clients in New York, New Jersey, the whole tri-state area up top, and I come around quarterly and do house calls up there. Otherwise, my physical location is in Durham, North Carolina, right in the corner of Broad and West Club. They can Google me. They can check out my Facebook page, just Dr. Bass, and the email is docbass411@gmail.com.
Well, I definitely appreciate you giving us a call and joining us on this conversation. Like I said, if you want to stay on the line, I would appreciate it. But definitely, Dean, run that ad, and we're going to get the next guest on.
Okay, thank you.
The old Renaissance is the new Renaissance, standing on tradition while embracing the spirit of distinction. This is the Harlem Brewing Company. Uniquely crafted beer brewed to deliver a taste, a sound, and a feeling that can only be described in one way, Harlem style. So come and take a trip on the A train with our Harlem Sugar Hill Golden Ale and our Harlem Renaissance Whitfield, the neighborhood original.
All right, Ms. Romano, welcome to Straight Talk with Dean and Mark. You are now on the line.
Wonderful, thank you.
How are you doing, Tara? I'm glad that you could join us in this conversation. Like I said, we love talking about all kinds of things. We had our creative people, but, I cannot have a show without at least having a couple of activists on the show. And we definitely had one as the first guest. That was the gentleman that had gone through hard times and prison and things of that nature and is now trying to make sure that others are not getting caught up in the drug world. You're involved in a tight battle as well because you are working with NARAL and a lot of things that deal with women's rights and the right to be in control of their own body and things of that nature. So I want to know what you've got going on and if you will share a little bit about some of the concerns you've got because we know we've got a nut in the office right now who isn't helping anybody.
Well, thank you so much for having me on. As you mentioned, my organization is NARAL Pro-Choice North Carolina. And so we are a statewide advocacy group, and our focus is on making sure that there is policy and also support, like real tangible support for folks, whatever decisions they make about their reproductive health care lives, and that includes preventing pregnancy, terminating a pregnancy, and carrying a pregnancy safely to term. So we advocate for things like safe and legal abortion, for access to comprehensive sex ed, for access to contraception, for access to general health care. Like one of the things we're involved in right now is making sure that North Carolina finally does Medicaid expansion because they haven't yet. We also advocate for things like access to affordable child care because that's really such a huge issue that we still haven't really solved here in North Carolina. So we are trying to just create a society that really does honor what folks' decisions they make about their bodies and about their sexual and reproductive health lives, and we just want to really focus on making sure people have the right to bodily autonomy, which is the right to do what they feel is best with their bodies. So we're strictly advocacy, and so right now there's a lot going on in lots of places around abortion access and contraception, and including in North Carolina.
And what are some of those concerns that y'all have had? Because like I said, I know there's, as you just mentioned, a lot of tremendous interest in this, and a lot of people are just amazed at some of the things that people are trying to stop folks from having, both in terms of true knowledge of the different options and things of that nature, as well as just having access to a lot of things. So I was just wondering what some of the things that you've dealt with here in North Carolina, because even though we like to think of ourselves as a progressive state, and definitely Durham is progressive, the rest of the state not always as much.
And it all depends. Honestly, I think, like, one of the things that we believe we've seen data on is that, a lot of people in North Carolina, I would say the majority, support access to the full range of reproductive health care options, including access to abortion. They certainly support access to contraception. And what we're seeing is in a General Assembly that doesn't reflect that. And that has to do, I think, a lot with we have a very extreme gerrymandered General Assembly. And so you've got people in districts who are not responsive to their constituents, and so you've got people in the General Assembly who are focusing on restricting access to abortion, restricting access to contraception, restricting access to health care, and that's really not, I think, reflective of what people in North Carolina want. I mean, North Carolina actually for a long time had been considered, it wasn't like North Carolina was really progressive on issues around contraception and abortion, but they had been considered a progressive state in the South for a number of years. North Carolina had actually legalized some types of abortion prior to the Roe v. Wade decision in 1973. And then what happened was we just took a very hard conservative turn after the elections of 2010, like a lot of places. And so then you've started to see a lot more restrictions on being able to access abortion. They've defunded state defunding of Planned Parenthood. They've really tried to go after comprehensive sex ed. They keep chipping away at that. And, of course, not expanding Medicaid. North Carolina is one of the, it's getting smaller of the number of states who have chosen not to expand Medicaid under the Affordable Care Act, and North Carolina is still holding out. You've got conservative leadership in the General Assembly that is holding out on that. And so you've just got what we're seeing is just that there are a lot of people who are not able to get access to the health care they need, and that includes comprehensive reproductive health care. And it just seems like, it's just been tough these past couple of years.
And is it harder in, I'm thinking it might be easier in places like Durham and Raleigh. I grew up in Warrenton, so I was wondering what kind of luck you've been having in terms of getting the message out to, say, the rural communities, because Warrenton is a rural community and there are other rural communities that are part of North Carolina. So I was wondering what kind of luck you've had in terms of reaching and getting that message out to the rural communities, because that's a lot of times where the conservative message gets out, and I think too strongly. And I also sometimes wonder if part of that isn't not to knock our people that are very religious and church-bound and everything, but sometimes I think that message gets corrupted by certain church leaders and everything. So I was just wondering your thoughts on how we're doing in terms of getting the message, particularly to our rural areas, but even the urban areas as well.
Well, that's a great question, because one thing we think about is how really a lot of people, I think, don't necessarily really think about the issues around access to abortion or access to contraception until maybe they realize they need something, and then they're trying to access it, and they realize it's not easy for them to do. One of the things when I talk to people about this issue is I try to help people understand that ultimately for a lot of people it's not really a political issue, particularly access to abortion. It's just something that people are making decisions based on what is going on in their lives, and it's not something that they're really thinking about, and then suddenly they or somebody they know may need to access abortion, and they realize they can't. And then it's a very personal issue, and it's been made very political. We don't think that it really is a political issue. And actually, there are people, we have these labels like of pro-life and pro-choice, and a lot of people, I think, particularly younger people, don't feel very compelled by either of those labels. You will have people who define themselves as pro-life, but then what they mean is like they themselves would never access abortion, but they think other people should be able to do that. And so I think what we see is a lot of inflammatory language used by anti-abortion folks in the General Assembly who are just trying to rile up a certain group of people, but that's not really representative of a lot of people. But we feel like when you have that inflammatory language, it's hard for us to have these nuanced conversations. Like a lot of people, I think, like I certainly talk to a lot of people about abortion access, and people have a lot of different feelings. People who access abortion have different feelings about it. A lot of people, whatever their feelings, they still feel like it's not a decision they can make for other people, and that's all we're trying to help people understand. And I feel like we just can't have those like nuanced conversations because you've got like this narrative that's just been put out there that is like, if you're religious, you must be opposed to abortion, or if you're a rural area, you must be opposed to abortion. And that's not necessarily true. It's just that we've sort of put out these narratives, and we've also made it hard for people to talk about abortion. There are people who don't like to say the word because they're afraid of the reactions they'll get, and so you aren't really able to have these conversations. And then, of course, there's so much stigma attached to abortion. Actually, maternity care and miscarriage and all these things, there's so much stigma, which keeps people quiet, and then we just don't hear these stories that are really very common. And that can actually create a common experience for a lot of people, but because people just stay so quiet about it, we actually, I think when people say, well, people maybe in this community are opposed to abortion, and usually what I talk about is like, have you asked them how they feel about it? Because we don't necessarily know until you ask them. So there's a lot of assumptions, I think, that are being made. So one of the things that we try to do in our NARAL Pro-Choice North Carolina is a very small organization. We are statewide, but we're very small, and so we can't always be out in as many rural and different areas as we'd like to be, but we are starting to work with folks in rural areas. We're definitely starting to work with faith communities to be able to try and have those conversations so that we feel like you can find a lot more people who do have support for abortion access and certainly don't support all these restrictions being passed in the General Assembly, particularly when they have other things that they feel are more important, like access to health care, funding public education, making sure we have a living minimum wage. These are things that a lot of people really feel more compelled about. I think your average voter feels more compelled about those things.
Yeah, definitely. And I also sometimes find that people, like you said, they try to want to stick an either-or label on people, like you mentioned.
Right.
And I think that there's a lot of people that are nuanced, that they may not necessarily be either all in or all out in terms of their view and everything. Because I know I've had several conversations with people that will give you those exception rules. And I think that even that sometimes plays into the political discussion because they'll, be like, I'm against it unless the person has been assaulted or somehow abused or something else like that. But those kind of nuances, I think, actually create problems with the discussion because you're limiting what you're allowing the people to have access to when you're trying to, only put it on people when they've been in these very radical situations in terms of, these severe abuses, but you don't want to give it to the person that has other reasons for wanting and needing to have an abortion.
And I think, and that's exactly the idea of people sharing stories, because I think people really do have, in my experience anyway, people have a lot of empathy and compassion when they hear people's stories and they can relate to them. I mean, I think, people who say, they want to make